You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 239. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Globeck, author of How to Get on Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Globeck. Now that we are in the midst of summer, have you ever dreamt of escaping to the south of France? Is that the dreamy place that you're considering going for a vacation? What about packing up and moving there? And not to the south of France that you might be thinking of, but to a tiny village in the middle of nowhere filled with 800 people who all know each other, who were born and raised together, who have lived there for generations. Well, friends, that's exactly what Steve Hoffman did, and he wrote a memoir called A Season for That, which comes out today. You might recall hearing about Steve when I interviewed his wife, Mary Jo Hoffman, about her book, Still the Art of Noticing. I am so excited to get to introduce you to Steve, who has gone from being a tax planner to now a memoirist and has his book coming out today talking about everything they did in France, why they moved to France when they did, and how this second career has practiced for retirement for him, but also how it's given him the new perspective that he needed at the time he needed. And then a bonus, what we all need to be doing in our marriages to keep them strong, healthy, thriving. And let me tell you, taking it from the Hoffmans, this is exactly what you should be doing. Hello, Steve. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone? Share with them why I like you so much.
I'm a tax preparer and food writer. I'm an industry of one. My industry will die with me. But I live in Minnesota, and my tax preparation job is what funds my writing. So both halves of my brain operate sort of hand in hand to help me do what I have to do. Both pay all the bills and also fund a writing career that I don't then have to go chasing assignments for. And that just led this year to my first book, a memoir of our family's time in the Languedoc region of southern France. That is published on July 9th. And that's part of what we're talking about today, I think.
Congratulations. I love to be the first one who gets to congratulate you before it's even the real day. But today is pub day, and it's out in the world.
You've earned the right to be the first. You have worked so hard with us. And like I said, you really have become our favorite person. We kind of get emails from Michelle. We're like, oh, okay, our lives are under control. Michelle's on
it. I love that. Thank you. I have never heard someone say I'm an industry of one and it will die with me.
The great tradition of tax preparer food writers really is me and only me. And like I said, yes, will die with me.
Now let's talk for a minute about the tax planner part, because I joke, yawn, yes, because you are not like the epitome of what I would consider the boring tax accounting person. You have so much personality and charisma and character that comes out in the greatest ways. I chuckle every time you send me an email or there's a text or you're like, let's effing go. And I'm like, yes, Steve is here. Or when we joked about, no, we have to talk about Mary Jo too, because Mary Jo's been on the show and she teased before. So she came out here and she told me some stories about your tax planning and the kinds of things you sometimes deal with. And so I took it upon myself to send you a message that's saying that I need help with my taxes. And your response about whether my grandmother's aunt's cousin had passed away and we now have a farm that needs to be it was so classic and beautiful. I was like, I gotta save this.
That's my classic, because I get emails every week saying, Steve, I got a quick tax question. And there are no quick tax questions. You're asking me essentially to, consume and then recycle and the entire IRS United States tax code in order to answer your quick tax questions. So I joke with all my clients, there are no quick tax questions, but the best of them are always quick tax question. And then literally it's an extended paragraph about inheriting the farm in Iowa that was subdivided, where the tillable land was subdivided off from the house, which is now rented, and one of them is an LLC and one is not, and there are 6 cousins who are all going to inherit, and just looking for your thoughts, Steve. I get a lot of that.
I love it. And it makes sense, especially when you describe it that way, why your memoir is so beautifully written. But take us back to, I know reading from the book that you have had this love of language and of French specifically, but then you went off and you taught yourself Greek, and because that's normal. You're a very normal person. We all do
I know.
this. We all go, you know what, I want to learn Spanish. I'm going to Spain and just immerse myself, and poof, there I am. I'm fluent. It's very normal. And you went from this, but then now you're a tax planner and who has this amazing other gig. Take us back.
So there is an interesting connection, I would say. Well, first of all, yes, my studies were all in language and writing and literature. So I was a lover of books from a young child, loved language, happened to have a facility with pronunciation that I can take no credit for. But that meant language was fun for me. And so when I first heard French and realized that I could actually speak it and sound like a French person, I was smitten really from then through the rest of my life. But what really brought me into languages first was grammar. And I love the linear rule-based elements of grammar. So really grammar is a way of learning a set of rules, mastering them, and then applying them in various contexts. And that is really what tax preparation is too. So there is a weird connection. Tax preparation is understanding the United States tax code, understanding how it applies to individual situations, and then applying those rules. They're not unrelated. And in fact, in the reverse, they're interestingly related, I would say, because tax preparation is surprisingly intimate. It sounds like I wear a green eye shade and don't know how to speak to people, but I do between 500 and 600 tax returns a year, which means I have 400 to 500 tax clients. I am involved in their lives unavoidably. I know often as much about them as anybody else in their life other than their spouse or their doctor. If they go bankrupt, I have to know about it. If they get divorced, I have to know about it. If they lose a child, I have to know about it. If they are having, have to go through IVF, I have to know about it because we're going to deduct those medical expenses. And so in a weird way, I feel as if my training in the humanities is part of what makes me maybe a better than average tax preparer. I don't know that I know the rules of tax preparation better than a CPA, but I know based on my annual continuing education course, which is full of not a lot of like budding Broadway stars, let's put it that way. Yes, I have an ability to communicate. I have an ability to empathize. I have an ability to listen and to translate really obscure language into plain English for people and help them solve their problems. And so there really is a way in which my language training helps me be good at what I do in this apparently seemingly completely unrelated context.
I love that because I get the question a lot too. How does jet fuel relate to podcasts? And
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
always there's a way that they all relate to each other and how we end up where we are. So now take us to the point where you said, Mary Jo, let's move to France. And let's not just move to Paris where people, it's a big city. Let's move to a village of 800.
We had actually done similar things before. We in our 20s, we basically dropped everything. Mary Jo was in mid-career in her, she was a rocket scientist as a profession. And we dropped everything for 3 months, and she basically risked her job. And we said, we're going to French Polynesia. And we went to French Polynesia. We stayed on some of the outer islands. It was not romantic. It was buggy and full of infection and uncomfortable guest houses, and we couldn't afford to do it right. And so we ended up meeting a local Tahitian who helped us live for the most part on reef fish and breadfruit and mangoes and papayas. So it was completely impulsive. We didn't have any particular connection to French Polynesia other than that I spoke French, and so we assumed that we could have a sort of exotic experience but get a little bit deeper than we could otherwise because we would speak the language. In the end, French didn't do us that many favors because the French bureaucracy and colonization of French Polynesia has been horrible, and they're deeply resented. So other than being able to, order food, the French didn't do me a whole lot of good. However, the experience was incredible. And what happened is at the end of that trip, we were there for 3 months. For a month of it, it felt like we had discovered paradise. We woke up every morning. We were sitting on a beach, coral beach, white coral beach, deep blue water, and behind us, emerald green volcanic islands. We thought we discovered paradise. After 3 months, we were bored because every day it was a white coral beach, it was deep blue lagoon, it was tropical green island behind us, and it was reef fish every day made the same way. It was breadfruit, which is a bland potato like, sort of starchy vegetable, and even, believe it or not, mangoes. There were so many mangoes there that they were just sort of rotting in the street everywhere. And we felt like we'd reached the end of this place to some extent. So when we decided to go to France, it was in some sense also impulsive, but it was also a reaction to that first trip because we wanted to go somewhere. We wanted to settle in and be there for a long time. The kids had gone to French immersion school in the Twin Cities, so we wanted to go somewhere where they could perfect their French. So it was going to be French or French speaking. But also, we had decided at the end of our Polynesian trip that if we were going to go and commit to a place again, yes, it would be wonderful if it were beautiful, but it was more important that it had a deep cultural history. And so from there, it made the most sense for a fall semester, if we're going to put kids in school, to go to southern France rather than northern France, simply because the weather was going to be nicer, and Minnesota is not nice, for a lot of the year. It's nice to escape that every once in a while. Other than that, it was really, okay, sure, let's give this a shot. We've done this before. How bad can it be? Where, in the worst case scenario, we pack the kids up and don't make them go through with it. And we more or less, threw a few electronic darts at a map of southern France, and one of them hit a tiny little village called Otignac. We got a response back immediately from an Irish landlord who was willing to take our family for that extended time. And we're like, it looks cool. It looks like a nice place. Let's do it. And in part, it was embracing that sort of impulsiveness that we feel there's a little bit of a thrill when we've done something like that together and sort of understood that we are going to have to be kind of on. We are going to have to like operate at our capacities to make this work. And dropping into southern France for 6 months was a thrill in its way, because it's like, okay, let's give this a try. This is going to be really hard, but if we do it, it's going to be really, really rewarding.
And I love in the book you write about the hard parts. The As a couple, that Mary Jo's not speaking French and how hard it is that she's like, introduce me. Come in,
Right.
let's go meet all the neighbors. You're all, no, that's not what we're doing. And then, for the kids to get acclimated as well. And, are they finding friends at school? And, how is this all going? You don't hold back. And I loved it because it's very real, as a memoir should be, but yours is very real.
A lot of French travel memoirs are romanticized, and they'll throw in the occasional plumbing problem as a way of introducing some kind of conflict in what is otherwise more or less a gushing account of being in this beautiful place where the food is beautiful and the people are beautiful and the language is beautiful and everything kind of there's a little bit of almost a sort of look at me, don't you wish you were here kind of snottiness about that kind of memoir. Peter Mayle did a really famous series of memoirs, A Year in Provence and Toujours Provence and Encore Provence. They were fun and funny, and they're sort of addictive. and yet there was an element of lightness and shallowness to them. He knew enough to make the reader believe that they were kind of getting to know France, but really you weren't necessarily all that much. But what you really for sure weren't getting to know is Peter Mayle. He was there with his wife. She's a complete cipher. You don't know if he has kids or not. There were no real struggles, and at some point, that's not a story. That's just a travel log. That's a diary to some extent. That is fun and entertaining. But I really wanted to go a little bit deeper with this and have this be, in some sense, a revising of that kind of very popular French and European travel memoir that happened a lot 20 years ago or so. And we're now in a new world. And I think it was fun, but also much more engaging for me to be married to an actual real human being who shows up on the page and challenges me and is a true equal. And we're struggling to understand whether we've pushed our kids too hard and whether we're, doing some damage. And yet we're also giving them this opportunity that feels like it's something we really should try to give them. So there is definitely a lot of struggle in the book, a lot of sort of self-reflection, a certain amount of challenging of myself and my ego, that I'm forced in some way to face up to. And I feel anyway, and certainly hope that that makes it a more interesting and certainly a deeper story about being abroad with family.
And it's very realistic now, as it should be, but to know you and Mary Jo now personally in the flesh, to have broken bread and shared wine, and not with you yet, that's coming, but at least
I
with
hope so.
Mary Jo and Eva, to really see that exactly what's in the book is who you are in real life. And to me, that makes it even better, and I hope that as people listen to you, they'll now hear you read the book to them, and they can as well because it's in audiobook form.
I know. I'm so excited. I just finished narrating it. I'm so excited. Yes.
I think one of the big parts of the book too is your struggle and journey to figure out what it is you want to do, and how you just threw yourself into all of these little different things in the village of, well, I'm going to go to the butcher shop and I'm going to go play butcher for a day, and I'm going to go into the vineyard and I'm going to go harvest the grapes, and then I'm going to make the wine with the winemakers as well. Have you always, I mean, granted, now knowing that you moved to France and you immersed yourself in that way, and that as a young adult, and then also, as a father and a husband, but have you always been that way of, what, I'm just going to go try this?
Not at all, honestly. That's part of to the extent that there's tension in the book, that is part of the tension of the book, which is Mary Jo. Again, to the extent that there's tension in the book, there is an ongoing battle of sorts between Mary Jo and me, because I arrive believing that France will magically make everything better. That's how I felt about it when I went to Paris, when I first sort of really learned how to speak French. And it's how I expected this trip would go as well. France was a magical place for me. France turned me into a person that I wanted to be, that I wasn't in other contexts. And Mary Jo really had to encourage me strongly to get out of that mindset, to get over myself, to not just be somebody who spoke beautiful French and got compliments for it, but to actually plunge into the village, the culture. And so it was very much at her instigation that I started doing those things. And it moved me from a stance of, I'm here to impose a vision of this trip onto this place. And also, I'm here, uh, in some sense, performing. I'm the amazing American who arrives in town who can speak really quite good French, and then I'm going to get complimented for that, and that's going to be good enough. And then meanwhile, we're going to have nice little moments on the terrace and at the cafe where we're drinking wine and coffee. And at some point, she essentially calls bullshit, which she's very, very good at doing, and almost always is right. And here was extremely right, and saying essentially, "This isn't what we're here for, Stevie. We're here because we have kids who need to see you be better than that. Also, you need to instill confidence in them that we've got this under control." And so it moved me again from the stance of performance to a stance of ignorance, really, and wonder, I would say. And from there, suddenly In other words, asking questions from a position of I don't know the answer, and putting myself into positions where I might look a little bit ridiculous. And it was exactly when that started that people started to accept us. We had a lot of trouble immersing ourselves into this tiny insular village, 800 people. It was essentially an extended family, more or less. And here we arrive out of nowhere, expecting that everybody's going to love the Hoffmans in their midst. And it didn't happen until we started doing that kind of thing. So, sitting here terrified before this butcher, this sort of godlike figure in French, rural culinary culture, asking if I could stand behind behind the counter with him, felt like sacrilege. It felt like, asking if I could stand next to the priest while he's preaching in church. And he was like, it would be a great pleasure. And then understanding at some point that we're in a region that's completely covered with vines. We're sitting in our house or driving, to and from various places behind our tinted windows in our brand new Renault, wondering why people aren't accepting us. Well, if the place is covered in vines, you should get out in the vines if you're going to get to know people and get to know the place. So those are real turning points in our movement from being outsiders to being insiders. But it was also a new way of interacting with a foreign place for me, encouraged by Mary Jo, that really changed everything and has changed, I think, the way I think about being myself and being in foreign places, really thanks to her.
And I feel like there's this part where it could have really made you or broken you as a couple of because she does push you of what is it you want? What do you want to come out of this experience? You have to figure that out because she's not going to do it for you. This is
Exactly.
up to you. And as you talk about practicing for retirement, which I made her talk about before too, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What do we want to do? Because we don't want to sit around and be bored and what is it that came out of it that you said, what, this is what I want to do. This is what's next. What is that looking like?
Well, we did practice for retirement. We did, return each of us to some early loves. Mine was language and writing and books. Hers was art and photography. As you know, she just published her book 12 years later. That really began in the crucible of that trip to France when she started taking photos of nature every day. And I started keeping a journal and became, late in life after a lot of real estate and tax preparation, what I had always dreamed of being, which is an actual writer. I started doing food writing, won some national awards, and then suddenly I'm doing this thing that I really never that I dreamed about a lot, but never really actually truly believed I could do. And now here we are 12 years later, and I have a book being published today. So I think what we discovered that we wanted was, for one thing, I needed to believe that I could be a writer before I could even want to be a writer, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, I want to be an astronaut. Well, good for you, Steve. Like, I don't really want that. It's like, that's just not going to happen. And there was an extent to which not having done it seriously or not having, I took it very seriously, but not having seriously believed I could be a published writer inhibited my ability to actually dream about it. So part of it was her convincing me, Stevie, I read I read a lot of books. I read what you write. You're good enough. You can do this. So part of it was just accepting that I could do this and that I could return to these early loves and make something like a career out of them. But the other thing that really came out of this rethinking of what we wanted the next part of our lives to be was that we had always wanted to collaborate. We had always wanted to collaborate creatively. And it was sort of rediscovery of that also very early wish that we could, that we had dreamed about in our 20s, that there would be, there's an image in the book called The House with Two Wings, which was an early version of our kind of dreaming about what our ideal house would be like. And in the end, it's really what our ideal life would be. And that was, a U-shaped house with a hearth and a kitchen at the base, and then two wings, and one wing is an art studio and one wing is a writing studio. And that had also fallen fallow to some extent over the years as the busy middle years of parenting and earning made it sort of impossible to dream about that. But as we left, I think we had a new idea that wait a minute, maybe this is possible too. And I think these two books are maybe the first tangible expression of what I think we hope could happen, and that is that we continue to create both separately but also together. That there may be a chance to actually do this thing that is really really hard, that we don't have a lot of examples of, that we can actually follow, and we're kind of breaking new ground as a couple, creating together in a very intertwined and sort of intersupportive way.
And I love it because it came together. You didn't anticipate that you would have pub dates 2 months apart, and you're both included in each other's books, and it's so unique, and it excites me to no extent. As you know, I love that this is happening for both of you, and that we can refer to each of you in each other's books to watch you together, promoting the books. And it's Steve and Mary Jo. It's not just Steve. It's not just Mary
Yep.
Jo. It's the Hoffmans in
Yeah,
everything.
and it has been Steve and Mary Jo for 35 years. I would say that's part of the thrill of the book for me, was actually getting on paper what a marriage of equals really means. And it means, yeah, all the good stuff, but it also means some of the tough stuff. There is a thrill in that. I think there's an idea that a long marriage is kind of a boring thing, and you're just getting through, and yeah, it's great, and we all celebrate it, but really there's a lot more excitement in the world than a long marriage. And I didn't necessarily intend to dispute that, but I think there is at least a portrait in the book of how thrilling a long marriage can be. And I talk about, there's a lot of talk in the food world and the wine world about terroir, which is, that a particular food is valuable in some sense because it comes from a very specific place that can't be recreated anywhere else on earth. Or a particular wine comes from, a particular climate and a particular slope of a vineyard with a particular amount of sun exposure and particular grapes that grow well in that place. And there's no way to recreate that. And that wine is from there. It's famous for being from there because it couldn't be done anywhere else. And there is an extent to which a long marriage is similar. It's, yes, there could have been more adventure potentially, maybe even, there could have been more money if we hadn't been so committed to each other. We could have been off not knowing each other very well, making tons of money. I mean, she could have stayed at Honeywell and been a vice president, and we would be much better off financially right now.
She could be my husband's boss.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, she was really told at one point, we know she was a very promising young engineer, and they were thrilled to have a woman engineer anywhere in the building, just because it was so unusual, and they understood that this is valuable as as a part of the new era in the 80s, when it was a very male dominated industry. But at some point they did say, you should be aware that you're married to Steve right now, but when you take your next promotion, you'll be married to Honeywell. And that was essentially the end, right? But we could have taken that, and like I said, things would be much more comfortable right now. But there is a terroir to a long marriage. There is an irreplaceability. There are experiences. There's a built up over time understanding of who we are, of what we are together, of what we've built. And there's no way to ever go back and redo that in any other way with anybody else. So I think it's a fun way of looking at marriage, and I think I'd like to think of the book as showing. I move from, also in that book, I move from sort of ego based cooking in the kitchen. I'm trying to be the best French cook in the world, and I'm inheriting much of my desire to cook from that sort of very fancy, very male, very ego driven haute cuisine. And by the end of the book, I've discovered this love of this quiet domesticity, this intimate domesticity of just the four of us around the table, and cooking for that specific group of people. And I think there's something similar to the realization that I come to about this marriage, that this is something irreplaceable. And it's long and it's deep. It's not shallow and wide, and it runs in parallel to, I think, our discovery about travel in the book, which is also that one of the thrills that we discover in this tiny little place that is in nowhere, central, southern France, where people don't tell stories about the last time they were in Tokyo or Angkor Wat or Beijing. they tell stories about what a particular how which vines do well in particular conditions because they've been there all their lives. They've been devoted to this place all their lives, and there is this incredible richness in what they can tell you about themselves and the place that they live. And I think that's paralleled in this idea of a long marriage as being a form of terroir. There is an irreplaceable richness that is different from wide-ranging adventure, but that has almost equal amount of diversity and certainly a lot more richness.
I love this. You're going to make me cry. It's so beautiful. I absolutely love it because I've admired you as a couple in between reading the book and getting to know you both. And the way I love that you get together at night and you talk about, what do we want? What do you want the
Hmm.
future to look like? What's our family look like? What you discuss all of this and you do it over a glass of wine and you've got this beautiful porch and you're looking at the water and I picture you there doing that and it inspires me to do more of it with my husband. I'm like, yeah, let's sit down. Let's be Steve and Mary Joe. Let's grab a cocktail. Let's talk about the future and, what is it that we want? Because so many people in general just don't know. And
Yeah, I
here
agree.
you are sitting down as a couple and saying, let's figure this out and let's figure it out as individuals, but also as a couple and even bigger as a family. And that's what makes it all work and makes it beautiful. And that's why it is so strong and why we're celebrating both of you, especially right now.
Yeah, I mean, as nerdy as it sounds, one of the most thrilling elements of of our marriage has been our regularly sitting down and making 5-year plans. And that sounds like we're straight out of communist, out of Soviet Russia, but it's it is a deliberate putting on paper, here's what we want to happen in the coming years. And for one thing, part of the thrill of it is that everything almost always happens on that list. And everything that happens on that list almost always happens sooner than 5 years. There's something about putting it down on paper. And so, we literally early in this process, we were like, Steve's going to be a food writer and he's going to be able to, and this is like literally like just shoot the moon what he might in our wildest imagination. Steve someday will be able to send an email to the editors of the Washington Post and Food and Wine magazine and the LA Times and the New York Times, and they will know him and they will respond to his email. I'm like, yeah, right. I mean, whatever, Mary Jo, sure, let's put it down. But it's and
They do.
less than 5 years later, I've got an article published in the Washington Post, an article published in Food and Wine magazine, and I now have actually a personal relationship with those two editors. So again, it's super nerdy and it sounds unromantic, and yet there's this idea of sort of dreaming together that really just brings you close, and it makes working together toward the goal thrilling instead of like I just see so many couples that feel as if they're each working towards something separate and then they're compromising on what they do together. Like, yeah, I really want to go play golf with the boys. Yes, I really want to do whatever I want to do. And then we'll have this bonding time when we're not doing our own separate things. And that bonding time, I think, I think bonding is a badly used word. I don't think a lot of bonding happens when people think they're bonding. You can't really
Hmm.
bond with kids between 6 and 8 p.m. You got to be there a lot, and you can't really bond with your spouse on a weekend in the Florida Keys a year.
It's
It
more
can't
than that.
happen.
Hmm.
It has to be just more togetherness, actual physical togetherness, but there has to be more mental togetherness, thinking about what do we want to do and what do we want to do together. And there's a lot of that involves letting go of things. Committing to a tiny 800 person village is saying yes to that. It's also saying no to a lot of really romantic sounding things. Going to Paris, staying in Paris, doing a tour of Europe. Those are all thrilling sounding things that you have to say no to commit to this one thing. And there are a lot of lives that I could imagine I could have lived that sound really great, but they're not quite as great as this. And so you have to be willing to let go of some things that you think you want your life to be because what you're choosing is better and richer in its way.
I love that. Let's end on that high note.
Sounds great.
Where can everybody find you? Where can they buy a season for that, whether it's audio or hardcover?
Yes, I'm most sort of interactive on Instagram, on social media anyway, and there I'm at SJR Hoffman. My writer's website, where you can read my previous writing, most of my magazine and newspaper writing, is just www.sjrhoffman.com. And the book itself is available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes and Noble. Really anywhere now. As of today, it's available in any bookstore I think that you want to visit, for the most part, anywhere in the country. And I'm not going to be coy. I'm really, really proud of it. It took me 8 years to write. I had to learn how to write a book while I was writing a book. I was in kindergarten and graduate school at the same time. And it took longer than I wanted. But in this last year, it came together and really became the book I had hoped it would be. So I'm really proud of it. And I think people are going to enjoy the adventure component of it, but also the seeing a person come to a point of self-discovery as well.
Congratulations. It's beautiful. And I am so excited that now everybody else in the world gets to read it. And I can't wait to cheers with you next month
Thanks,
over
Michelle.
it.
I cannot either. This is a thrill. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, friends, I loved the advice that Steve gave about marriage, about figuring out what you want to do. And you can bet that our house is about to go make a 5-year plan and start writing things down for both of us and where we'd like to see our future going. I absolutely love the idea of doing that and then having it all come to fruition. I absolutely adore the Hoffmans, and I'm so grateful that Steve took the time to share not only his memoir with all of us, but to share more of his story with me and with all of you. Please go out and purchase A Season for That by Steve Hoffman. It is out today. It is amazing. And the audiobook that he narrates has him speaking in French too, which is much better than what my translations might have been in reading the book. So do yourself a favor and go grab a copy, because it will take you to a new part of France that you didn't even know existed.